So I think we're going to get started. We have a couple people that are going to keep joining us as we kind of go on here. Whoops, I almost ended the meeting. So let's officially get started. I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. I know some of you have been here for the long haul for a lot of the webinars with us, and some of you might be this your first time. So glad you're here. I'm a little surprised that we don't have a bigger group today, because I really thought that, you know, public speaking is like the biggest fear of most people in the world. So I thought people would want to come and get over that fear, but maybe they just don't want to. But I'm glad that you guys are here. So a couple things we have to do to get started. First, I always like to thank Beaver County Behavioral Health, who has sponsored us and who is supporting us and allowing us to do these webinars and hopefully give people out there, give all the providers and others just a little break from the day to day, but also get you good stuff, information that is good for you. So thanks to them for continuing to support this process. And thanks always to ETC, particularly Jen and Kim, who are, like I said, the wind beneath my wings. They always handle all the background details and take care of even things that I don't even think of that need to be taken care of. So I always appreciate that. And they're fun people, so I always like working with them. We have one more session scheduled right now. We have a webinar next Friday, which is June the 26th at 11 a.m. It's called Lean on Me. And I'll be joined by co-host Lauren Tamako, who is a supervisor for case management with Marikey. So she is going to talk with us about, I call them those non-treatment needs. I think that's a kind of an old school word term, but we're going to talk about all those things that clients sometimes need that isn't actually treatment, but that really supports and allows treatment to be successful. And she's going to talk with us about that. The other thing about Lauren is she is a new mom, and she became a new mom before the quarantine, but then was a new mom working from home with a newborn during the quarantine. So I always think about my days as a new mom, and they were stressful and they were different, and you were learning lots of new things. And to be doing that during this time of COVID had some interesting things to it. So she'll talk with us about that as well. So I hope you join us next week. We do have a couple more webinars on the horizon, so you'll be getting information about those. If you have ideas about something you think you'd like to hear, or someone you'd like to co-host, then, or if you would like to co-host, then let me know, and we can see what we can make happen. So we've had really great co-hosts so far. We've had Jack Manning, who's one of our Beaver County commissioners. We had Steve Cooley from the jail, who maybe we'll have him back because he was fun. We had a great panelist last week with Sean Owens, Dr. Sheffield, Lena Dowdell from the Harlem School District. So we've had some really great, Kate Lowry from the Beaver County SCA. We've had some really great co-hosts, and our co-host today is fantastic too. Phenomenal. Someone you probably don't know, or you may not know, because she's not kind of in our circle of behavioral health, but she's just a really great person. You're gonna love her. A couple things we might do a little bit different today, or at least we're gonna try it out, is there is the question and answer place at the bottom. So if you have any questions as we go along, or something you want to comment on, that's probably the easiest place for you to put it, is in the Q&A. We will try to answer those, any questions and things as we go along. So with that, I want to introduce our co-host for today. Her name is Katina Hunter. She is a distinguished Toastmaster, and we're going to talk about what that is, because some of you are probably like, I don't know what that means, but let's just say it's a big deal. Bigger deal is she is a two-time finalist, world champion of public speaking. Can you imagine? And she's been a finalist in the top 10 2 times. So she's really got it together. She's also a real estate professional, but she's much, much more than that. She's a marketing guru. She's a really great, strong woman. She's a good mom, a good family person, and a very good friend to me. So please help me welcome Katina. She's going to pop up here any second. Yep, any second. There she is. Hi, Katina. Yeah, now
hey y'all, how's everybody doing? Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, this is great. I think it's going to be so much fun. And to the crew who's here today, Katina and I have been friends for a long time. And one of the things that and Katina, I think I've shared this with you, that I really like about our friendship is Katina and I don't always see eye to eye on things. We have some different political views or different views of how we see the world. But what I really like is we can talk about those things, and then we can still be friends.
Very good friends.
We don't get mad. We don't, we just respect that each other has different opinions sometimes, and that's certainly okay. And I think we learn from each other too. Like sometimes Katina has said things that have changed my opinions. And
not often. Not often. I think you've changed my opinion much more than the other way around for sure.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about public speaking. So let's talk about the extremes. So in my world of therapy, we call it glossophobia. So glossophobia is the diagnostic fear of public speaking. Now, most people don't have that. I would say it's kind of like post-traumatic stress. Most of us have post-traumatic stress symptoms, but we don't actually have enough of the symptoms to meet the diagnosis for the actual diagnosis. So most people, the majority of people, do have fear of public speaking, but they don't actually have a diagnosable condition. And so some of the things people will talk about experiencing when they've had a fear of public speaking is their blood pressure goes up and they perspire more and their mouth gets dry. They get nauseous, panic attacks, and can even have more anxiety about the thought of speaking than actually doing the speaking. And you've experienced some of that too, Katina, right?
I'm a really outgoing person. I've always been that way. But when it comes to speaking, it was, the best way I can describe it, it's almost like riding a roller coaster where when you're standing in line, before you even get on the ride, your anxiety starts to build. And the closer you get, the more anxious you get. And then you get on the ride and when you click on the car and you feel that final click, then you're like, oh my gosh, there's no turning back. And that's exactly when you walk in front of an audience, they're like, well, there's no turning back now. And then it just spirals out of control. I mean, you're climbing up that big a clunk, clunk, clunk under your feet. And all these unrealistic thoughts are going through, like, what if it was just made by the person who created the lowest bid? I mean, like all these things, just like when you're on stage, you're like, oh my gosh, what if they start booing me? All these unrealistic things happen. And then you finally get to the top and then the brake releases and you whoosh down and everything's just absolutely crazy and like a huge blur. And then you get off and you're like, oh, let's do that again. That's exactly how speaking was for me.
Yeah.
Whole buildup was there, all of those unrealistic things going through my mind. And then my mouth would go so dry that my lips stuck to my teeth. And that's not very appealing at all because like it's obvious that you're trying really hard to work against that. And then you're trying to swallow and there's nothing there. So you're making really weird noise. I mean, it's just terrible. It's terrible. The only way that I think took me quite a long time. And even sometimes I get nervous out of absolutely nowhere. It's just exposure over and over and over and over again.
Do you sometimes still have some of those symptoms?
Surprisingly, I'm actually more comfortable on Zoom meetings. Today, they came up a little bit. Not a lot. They're much better, but just because it's a new audience, I can't really see who I'm speaking to. I can't gauge people's reactions. Nobody's smiling or yawning, so I don't know if they're liking what I'm saying, if they don't. So it's just a little different. So not like it used to be at all.
Yeah.
Once in a while, I'm like, I recognize that being a little bit nervous there.
Well, and I always think too, I don't usually get very nervous anymore either, but sometimes I do. And I always think, as a therapist, that's connected to other stuff that's going on in our lives. So if, like this morning, I was telling Katina and Jen before we got on that my air conditioning guy was late and we got chit-chatting and it made me late. And so then I'm like worked up. I'm not actually anxious about today's session. I mean, these are my people. and it's Katina here with me. So I wasn't really anxious about that, but I was anxious. And sometimes we transfer that into that. So I think one thing that helps me if I get nervous before presenting is just to remind myself, what am I really nervous about? Is this about the actual presentation or is this about something else that's going on?
Yeah, very true. And that I'm actually going to go back and think of maybe what my situation was when I walked on stage in front of audience members that I'm so familiar with that I'm extremely comfortable. That's a really good insight.
Well, and I will say, and this might be weird. You tell me if you feel this same way, Katina, but I sometimes feel more comfortable presenting in front of a group that I've never seen before than in front of people that I know. Do you ever feel that way?
There's a lot of pressure. I spoke in school and I was hired by the PTO and I was a member of the PTO and I knew several of the teachers and I was known as this bigwig speaker, blah, blah, blah. I was so nervous because the expectation of me was a lot higher. If a stranger built me up, it's kind of like, I don't want to say if I let them down, I let them down, but it's just not the same.
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you that I am much more comfortable in front of an audience of 2,000 people. That's my comfort. When I have a whole like big fat room, that's when I'm comfortable, which makes no sense.
Well, it does make sense because you and I have different talents and skills. So one of the things that Katina and I talk about often is that we're both kind of doing the same thing with our speaking, but we do it very differently. Mm-hmm. And I feel more comfortable if the group is, I love a group of like 20, but a group up to like 50 or 60 is good too, because I like that interactive piece. You know, I like to be able to say something and then be like, hey, I noticed you kind of made a face about that. What's happening here? And I like that part. And when you get that huge group, that 2,000, that gets harder to do. But that's different for you.
It is different. And it's funny that you say that because they often ask me, how do you get that personal touch with such a big group? But I found, and it's my own personal belief, that with it really, I say intense eye contact, but that sounds really creepy, like you're staring somebody down, but with really good controlled, I don't even want to use the word aggressive, but intense eye contact. Aggressive eye contact. Come to me. But with I don't want it. All right, we got to come up with a better word for this. Aggressive, intense, but something.
Well, I think very engaging.
Oh, that's it.
I think that's the word.
You got it. So with very engaging eye contact, even one audience member, if it's a group of 20 or 2,000, it's that the whole audience feels and they can assimilate with what that person that you're looking at and who that person is, they can assimilate with that person. So you don't need to make eye contact with every single person in the room to get engagement, because I really feel that they know when you're holding eye contact with one person and maybe they're thinking, oh my God, next. Right. So maybe they're a little more hyper aware.
Well, and I think that adds to the genuineness too, which I think is so important with public speaking. And Katina does a lot of coaching of people with public speaking. And when I talk with people, that's one of the things I encourage is Katina and I have very different speaking processes. Katina organizes her speeches in a very different way, in a very, I'd say, more rigid way. Whereas she memorizes like hour-long speeches, word for word for word. I do not. I have like a running in my head, like here's what's next, here's what's next. I've tried to do it Katina's way, and it's very uncomfortable for me. I'm not very genuine when I do it that way. And I think you have tried doing it more my way. You do come across much more genuine than I do the other way.
But I've been trying really hard to reinvent how I approach speaking, because to be honest, that rigid way, as much as I feel that it created a more ease, you know, they say you should memorize something. If you're gonna know your speech, you have to know it well enough that you can't screw it up. How many times do you practice? Enough times that you can't get it wrong. So that was the I would take. But that process that I'm memorizing is, I don't want to say unbearable, but it's very scheduled. But then as soon as I get on the stage, I'm on, I don't want to say autopilot, but I know it so well that I feel more control of my pauses, more control over other things that I want to bring into my speaking, because I don't have to worry about the words.
Right.
As if I am speaking a little more off the cuff, then I have to kind of remember, okay, don't forget to add a pause. Where would it be good to add a pause? Because you don't know, because I don't really know exactly what I'm going to say next. Process getting to be on stage, it's much more enjoyable. But as I'm on stage, then it's a little more stressful. Yeah. So kind of a balance there. And this last couple of years, I've really been trying to reinvent how I approach speaking so that I can be more comfortable taking that less rigid approach, but then still maintain that comfort level on stage.
And I would think that would then allow you to just enjoy it more.
That's the key. I think that the audience is so in tune as to whether or not you're stressed out or what you're enjoying yourself. Absolutely.
Well, and I think this taps into one key point that I think is important for everyone here who's listening, who might be thinking about, however, for each of you who are here today, how are you utilizing public speaking? You know, you might not be getting up in a crowd of 2,000, in front of 2,000 people like Katina, but you might be having to comment in a Zoom meeting, or step up and give a presentation for your department at work, or interacting with a client one-on-one, or with the client and their family. So think about it in your context. But one of the things I think is always helpful is preparation. And whatever that looks like for you, like for Katina, for you, sometimes it's a little more specific. And for me, it's a little more fluid, we'll say. But so whatever the process is for you, but being prepared is one of the biggest keys for whatever might be happening.
Absolutely. My dad he told me the story several years ago. He was being interviewed on the radio, and he came in and he knew what the questions were, and he came in with his written responses, and was literally on air. The DJ or whoever's interviewing him noticed my dad is reading, and he reaches over, grabs a piece of paper, puts it away, and then was like, "Oh, go ahead, Don, keep talking." And so that was one of the worst things that he could have done, was be so over prepared, because it really sounds very scripted.
Yeah.
Very hard, because my stuff is pretty scripted, usually depends on the speech, but I then use my acting skills to make it seem like things are coming to me for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, you do have good acting skills. When
Nice.
when a long time ago, when I went through supervision training through the DDAP training that they provide, some of you out there are familiar with that.
DDAP sounds like a DJ, by the way.
DDAP.
You're like, I'm going to go out with my friend DDAP.
I will tell you, they're nowhere near as much fun as
all right.
So that is the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs.
Oh, all right, yeah.
They do credentialing and licensing and all that kind of stuff, and they give you requirements that you have to follow. And so when you become a supervisor, you have to go through this week-long supervisor training. And when I went through that years ago, one of the things that really stuck with me is they said, if you're working with an employee, just be honest and ask questions and just be genuine. And that I thought, okay, that I can do that. And then I had a staff member, so I was a very young supervisor. I had a staff member who was, I don't even remember what happened, but when in my interaction with him, I said to him, "Are you being sarcastic right now?" Because I really thought he was. And I was like, okay, just speak the truth. Just be genuine. Whatever's there, let it out. But let's just be natural and organic. And he was like, "Sarcastic? No, I'm not being sarcastic. What the hell is wrong with you?" And I was like, oh, I had to find that technique a little bit.
Well, here's something that I just learned. Yesterday, I was watching a TED Talk about negotiations, or a speaker on negotiations. Now, the guy that was speaking was the top kidnapping negotiator for international kidnappings, like in the FBI for years and years and years.
Okay.
Teaching realtors.
This is like serious negotiations.
This guy is,
can I get a nickel off my gas?
It's like, okay. Hey, I want to spend $20 on those pair of jeans that are $50.
Right.
Life or death stuff. So I'm listening to him though, and the one thing he said is that when you have bad news for somebody, is just come right out and say, "I don't have good news," and then tell them. It gives them just enough time to prep for the bad news, and then take it. And so yesterday I had some pretty bad news for a client of mine. I was like, all right, I'm gonna try it. And I was like, it's either gonna be like an epic, okay, just so you know, I have a plan, and I kind of prepped them like there's a way out of this, but we're gonna go into
right.
And I broke it to her. I was like, all right, I don't have good news. And she's like, oh, crap. And she starts starting to cry on the phone. I'm like, no, it's okay. I have a plan. And then I kind of reverted back to the normal thing. So yeah, I get you. Sometimes when I try to be direct, it just, I don't know.
Yeah. You just never know. Well, and I think that's an interesting point that leads us to, Katina, is getting emotional when you give speeches. So, I remember doing a impromptu speech at Katina and I are members of a club called Toastmasters, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But as part of our Toastmasters meeting, we do some impromptu speaking. And maybe 6 or 7 months after my mother had passed away, I had done an impromptu comment, like a minute. I mean, we're not talking a long time here, folks, like a minute about her. And I got so emotional, and I thought, oh, it was too soon. You know, it was too soon. Has anything like that ever happened for you?
To be really honest, I don't delve into emotional topics that I don't have complete control over.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, however, it comes up unexpectedly. Things
Mm-hmm.
talked about a million times. And I mean, you guys get this all the time as therapists, that somebody could talk about something a million times and be very blasé about it. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, that day it's extra hard.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to find that line. In several of my speeches, I do push the boundaries of my emotion a little bit, having to reel it back at the time. I was in a speech contest one time, and a gentleman gave a speech about his wife who passed away. I have to tell you, this speech was probably the most beautifully written speech I have possibly ever heard. And he's talking about the 5 most meaningful kisses. Oh my gosh. But she had passed away less than a year prior. And so he lost it in the middle of the speech. And he could not, it made everybody very, very uncomfortable just because they felt so badly for him. Who was speaking right after him?
Ta-da!
Yeah, and my speech was like super lighthearted, and I'm like, oh no. So yeah, it's hard to put that emotion in check.
Did he win?
No.
Did you win? Yeah.
But I had to change my intro a little bit though, because I couldn't come out as being like, okay, hey everybody.
Right.
Like I was planning
on
transition. Yeah, I had to make a pretty quick change to kind of come into it a little more subtly. And I even, I poignantly went over, because sometimes when you're in uncomfortable situations or the room is uncomfortable, you have to address the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So normally contestants don't speak when they pass to go up to the stage, maybe a good luck or something, but I made a very specific point so that the whole audience could see that I went over, and it took a couple of extra minutes before I went on stage to bringing him down a little bit, but hopefully bringing the audience down as well, and taking control of that and not brushing it over like it didn't happen. It was very obvious that it happened. It was very obvious that everybody felt very, very badly. So sometimes you just need to take that control.
It must be a trend for some of the contests that you and I do, the speaking contest where the wife dies. Because I remember one contest I was in, and I had such a phenomenal speech. I was so excited. And then the guy that went right before me, or maybe not right before me, but he went before me, did a speech about how his wife died. And he actually got down on his knees and like reenacted this moment. And I was like, yeah, I lost.
Oh my gosh, I remember that.
You remember that?
Well, that's another thing though, is that death and cancer is such a touchy subject in speeches, because it's so, I don't want to say it's so overdone, because it makes it sound like, oh, everybody has somebody who dies and I'm right. Experience off, and that's not my intention. But sometimes you have to frame it in a way that that's not the focus.
Right.
Even though it means so much to you, other people didn't know that person. So even though they assimilate with your feelings, it doesn't mean as much. So you just have to frame it in a slightly different way sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and I'm always very conscientious about, you never know what the story is of the people in your audience. So, and you never know when your story will touch them. Like I've seen Katina give speeches, and maybe they weren't even heavy speeches. They might have been good ones. And I got tearful. And it wasn't necessarily her speech, but it was something about that moment that touched me and tapped into something going on. And that can happen to our audience members, whether it's in a big arena or whether it's in a meeting. And actually, that's kind of our purpose, right? If we're communicating, we're trying to connect. And sometimes that connection is something heavy and heartfelt, or it might not be heavy to me, but it might be heavy to the person that heard it. And I always.
It's funny that you said that, because you find that person in the audience, if you make that intense, aggressive eye contact. No, what was the word we came up with?
DDAP, settle down, DDAP.
me my callback. I was going to use that later. What was the word that we came up with, that you came up with?
Engagement. Engaged.
So sometimes if you can find that person, like when I'm making eye contact with somebody and you hold that eye contact that engagement just a little bit longer than normal, like some people make eye contact for a couple of seconds. Yeah. I make eye contact for a full sentence or sentence and a half, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a little more intense.
Yeah.
And for some reason, that seems to draw people's emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So when I notice you getting there sometimes I feel back on that eye contact. I'm like,
I know.
Bill's gonna lose it.
Well, and I think too, when and Katina knows this, and some of you who've been to other trainings with me know, after my mother died and when I got diagnosed with cancer, that was a period of time where like anything could make me cry. I could cry over like, my pen ran out of ink. So we all had moments, I think, some of us more than others, where we get, and so yeah, like I've noticed that too, and I do appreciate that when you back off.
Oh, not get
so aggressive with your eye contact.
Right.
But I think those are important things to remember in the audience. And you've probably had this experience too, Katina. I did a speech recently for the National Association of Professional Organizers. And what I talked about was the trauma of hoarding. So sometimes those organizers, professional organizers, most of the time they just go into someone's home like you or me and they help, because I can't get my closet organized. But sometimes they go into homes where people have real diagnosable issues of hoarding. And so I was talking to them about the trauma and trying to educate them about how people get to that point. And afterwards, this woman came up to me and she said, that really touched me. And then she started telling me about her grandmother who was in the concentration camps, and how it just connected to her in a different way. I wasn't talking anything about that. But that's where, talking about trauma connected to a different trauma that she has. And I always enjoy those times when people come up afterwards and say, this really touched me, or this really made me laugh, or, I related to this. I think those are always good things.
Oh, it's amazing how we as a speaker, we know our speech and what we're saying inside and out, and exactly can gauge the reactions, especially if it's something like a competition speech that you've literally practiced hundreds of times in front of hundreds of people before you get to be on stage. On stage for the final speech in 2016, and I had practiced my speech in audience of one countless times, right? Plethora of times. And I've expected the audience to react in a certain way. There's one point where I'm actually talking about my son and I'm holding his little face down here and I'm saying, thank you for telling me the truth. And it's this really soft, sweet moment. And then I say, I hope that he feels comfortable, just as comfortable coming to me, 50 years later when he's an adult. And then I turn and I raise my arms just a little bit, showing that I'm cradling his adult face just the way I did as a child. Oh my gosh, doesn't that sound so sweet? The audience is guffawing, like falling out of, and I'm like holding my kid's pretend no face. And I'm just like, why are they laughing? I don't know the times I've done this speech. Like, why is this funny? But then I kind of had to like make it seem like, oh yeah, I totally expected this part.
That's right. That's what I meant.
Face, and I'm pausing and I'm waiting for the laugh. And then I kind of give a smile like, glad you got that joke. And I went on to the next thing. Totally. I had no idea that was the reaction they were going to get. Twice in that speech where I built in very soft, sentimental moments or concerning moments. And the audience is like, ah! Okay. So yeah, you never know. Sometimes you might have listened.
Well, some of that with that situation might be because your boys are still young. So you realize you don't have older children yet. They don't let you hold their face like that.
Maybe that was, yeah, honey, 30 years old child, how are you?
So that's probably the people laughing were like the people who had older children. They were like, yeah,
right.
Wow,
right.
Beautiful thought.
Right. Not going to happen. Not going to happen.
It might. But your boys are very sweet, so it might.
Oh,
it might.
My hands might migrate and be like, ah.
Or your boys might never grow any taller than they are, so it might just be.
Oh, it might just be.
You just never know.
Very true.
Well, Katina, let's talk a little bit about Toastmasters because we and I are referring to it a bunch. So Toastmasters is an international club that focuses on public speaking and leadership and really just overall personal growth for individuals. Katina and I are both members of Beaver Toastmasters. It meets the first and third Wednesdays of every month at the Beaver County Courthouse. Of course, right now we're virtual. We meet Wednesday nights from 7 to 8:30, and there's a curriculum that kind of helps you build on your skills and try out different kind of speaking. And the one thing I like about Toastmasters the most is that practice. I was in a conference the other day with the Small Business Association, and I meant to write down this quote, but it said something like the difference between theory and results is practice, something like that. So you can understand public speaking and you can want to be successful at it, but unless you practice it and really practice it in front of other people, then you may not be able to get over everything and build those skills like you want. So that's one of the most beneficial things. So Katina is a distinguished Toastmaster, as am I. She and I got our awards at the same time. Distinguished Toastmaster is kind of like the black belt of public speaking, I would say, right? Mm-hmm. It's the top. It's the biggest award that you can get.
Did you say the toppest?
The toppest? I don't think I did, but I will now. Oh. It's the toppest award you can get.
I like having the toppest award.
The toppest award. So it's the highest award that you can get in Toastmasters for public speaking. And Katina was able to get hers a little quicker than mine because she is fast paced and she moves along. She also inspired me because I was like, dang it, she is not getting it before me. So be a little competitive like that.
She had a little race going or something.
We did.
I think I had to buy you an iced tea. Nope. High stakes. High stakes. Very, very, very high stakes. But part of Toastmasters are these speaking contests that Katina and I have talked about. And they start low at the club level with people that you speak in front of all the time. And then they move up and up. And two, because Toastmasters is an international club, and that's a big part of their flair, I would say, is that they're international, then the public world champions of public speaking are somewhere different in the world every year. So what are the two places you got to present in, Katina, when you were in the top 10? Sure, Washington, D.C. was in 2000.
Woo! No,
yeah.
All right, so maybe not so international, but okay.
But Vancouver was the next year.
Vancouver.
And then hopefully Paris is next year. So okay. We'll see how that goes.
So what's happening with that? Because Katina has moved up the lines in the current contests, and where are you now?
Well, our current contests in our district have been kaput. So I made it through the area, and I was really gaining a lot of momentum with a speech that I really didn't like at first. Mm-hmm. But I got some.
Remind me which speech it was.
This is the one about my husband.
Oh yeah, the gifts.
What's that?
The gifts. The counting?
It was right. It was
list.
Yeah, like a checklist, and how my husband checks off every item on that list except for one thing. And then hopefully maybe you can see what that one thing is next year when I get to give this speech.
Next year in Paris.
Next year to be continued. So yeah, it's really for someone who has that competitive drive, because as you guys know, whenever you're talking with anybody, people don't have the same motivation. I do not understand people who aren't competitive, because I'm very competitive. I mean, I compete with like everything. If I come home, I'm like, hey kids, I bet, I can, finish this email before you eat your dinner first, just stupid stuff. That motivates me. Whereas I don't understand people who are like, okay, go ahead, finish that email. I'm like, well, come on. I don't get that blasé attitude towards competition. But for somebody who that is a driving factor for them, Toastmasters offers that. For other people who, what I like about Toastmasters is that there's such, the roots go in many different directions, all funneling to good speaking skills. So if you're competitive, there's a root there for that you can cling on to and work your way up. If it's getting feedback from other people or helping other people, totally different routes, there's some place in Toastmasters for everybody to jump on and motivate themselves with all these different faucets.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, when you get into a club, like you get feedback, but it's always constructive, and you can tell it's always given with love.
So I'm going to disagree with you, Jill, about something you said about 5 minutes ago. And I thought, if this comes up again, I'm going to bring it up. So here's,
okay. Let's hear it.
I really liked the quote that you said, where the difference between theory and results is practice. But I disagree, because how many times have you heard somebody who's very confident? They're like, oh, I love public speaking. I'm really good at it. And this is the same person that are in your like department that just drone on and on and on and on, and they think they're wonderful, and you're like, So I do feel that practice is super important, but even more so is the evaluations that you get in Toastmasters, because really it's very humbling to go there and give a speech that you have worked your heart and soul, poured your heart and soul into, only to have people be like, meh. And honestly, I have to be really honest. When I get feedback, I act really good. Like, oh, thank you so much. I love your comments. Thank you. I'll take that into consideration. And then I get in the car. I'm like, what the heck were they thinking? Did that sentence and that didn't make sense. But then I seriously have to take all of that and I have to let it settle. Give it 24 to 48 hours. And sometimes I don't even revisit. I will drop the speech for like a good week or two, and then reapproach the speech. And I'm reading the feedback, and be like, okay, they said that they were confused at this part. I said this sentence. All I need to do is repeat that sentence again to emphasize it. And then, because that sentence directly addresses their concern. And it doesn't mean that I need to rewrite the whole speech. It means that seriously, I add a pause, or I say a word twice, or whatever, or I change the influx of my voice. It's minor tweaks. And then it's a big difference. So I think that the evaluations and the feedback is even more.
I think you're right.
Yeah, it goes hand in hand.
The other thing I think about feedback we get from other people, and I struggle with this, and Jen, who is always with me for many of my trainings, can tell you this. We get the evaluations back afterwards, and it's like, and this is how I go through them. Great. Maybe not so good. What? And then I try to figure out who put this in. What row did this come from? I do this whole CSI thing. And then it's like, great. So, but then I'm like, I get focused. Like, what did I do that didn't connect with that person? But I think you're right. If you give it a little time, after a day or so, my ego isn't so bruised. And I can remember that, what do they say? 20% of the people are going to love you no matter what you do. 20% are going to hate you no matter what you do. And then you got the 60% to work with in the middle. So maybe he was part of that 20% that I'm just not going to make happy. And I know years ago I did a workshop, and I showed a video. Well, there've been a couple times where I've had embarrassing moments, or maybe offended someone. And the one time, I want you to tell your story, Katina, because it cracks me up. But the one time in one of my trainings, I had a meme. We were talking about homelessness, which is a very serious topic, and one that is close to my heart. But the meme was this homeless looking guy, and he had a sign, and he said, parents killed by ninjas need money for karate lessons. And I thought it was funny, and I put it up, and then this lady in the back row was like, I think that's offensive. And I was taken aback. And so I actually explored that with the group, and it was kind of funny because I said, well, anybody else here offended? Let's really talk about this. And I think one other person raised their hand. And then I said, this other guy raised his hand. He said, I wasn't offended, but I really didn't think it was funny. It's like, okay. Now, people commented on their evaluations that they were not offended. They thought it was funny. Ignore that person, But I've never used that meme again, because I do feel like if it takes away from what we're trying to express, well, then it doesn't need to be there.
I gave a very controversial speech several years ago, and it's the one that's titled The Gift. And I actually take layers of my clothing off during this speech. Okay. I've given this speech to my parents. I've given this speech to numerous church groups. Everybody's like, oh, it's great. Oh my gosh, it's so inspirational, blah, 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 blah. But the one time I gave this speech, and I'll tell you, person after person after person stood up and told me how absolutely offended they were because of that speech. And I really had to, I mean, it was very hard because on one hand, it was seriously split 50-50 on the feedback I was getting. 50% of the people loved it, 50% of the people hated it. And it was my job to kind of figure out how to maneuver through this. So in those situations, what I've learned is, first of all, I try very hard to control the evaluations I get. I try very specific. If I don't want them to comment on my introduction, if I love my introduction, fine. I'm not even going to ask. I'll just say, hey, what was your most, what was the part of your of my speech that was most inspirational to you? Which part did you like the best? And that tells me that that's where my emotional hook is in my speech, and not change that part. Whereas if I, just formulating and asking specific questions to get to the evaluations that you want. And secondly, if I get one person who says, nah, I didn't like this part, I ignore it completely. Like, don't even give it a second glance, forget it, move on. If I get two people who say that, I'm like, all right, maybe I need to consider, maybe I need to just let it mull around in my mind, see if there's a different way I can phrase it. And if I'm getting a lot of people who are saying that, then obviously it needs to be something that's addressed. But control your feedback, and then really monitoring the quantity and the quality, because you get feedback from people who are qualified to give you said feedback. So you really very much so.
Very, very true.
Oh, go ahead.
With the gift, within that speech where people were offended, because I've seen the speech. Demographics that were similar, like were they older women? Were they
women tended to like it?
Okay.
Typically older men. Now here's a funny story. I gave that speech at a contest, and this gentleman takes me aside, and remember how I talked about like the quality of the feedback, and some people are not. I'll leave it at that. So he takes me aside, and he's going on and on and on for about 20 minutes about how I need to act more sensual when I'm giving this speech.
Oh.
Gave more like some suggestions about maybe I should have a scarf and like, like drop the scarf, all this stuff. So again, I'm like, oh, thank you so much for your feedback. I really appreciate it. And I knew immediately out of my head, not even like bad advice, right? One thing. A couple months later, he saw me practice this speech again. Now I did not change one thing. That was the day that after I gave the speech, person after person stood up saying how offended they were. And the very first person to tell me was him. I didn't change anything. I didn't go more seductive. I kept everything static. And he stood up and told me how, in front of everybody, how personally offended he was about that speech. It's hard to get that mix.
Yeah, it is. And just so the audience knows, this is one of the best speeches that I've seen you give. It was so beautiful. And if you see it from beginning to end without kind of the precursor that you're getting right now, it's even more powerful, because the whole context of the gift is the body and the different parts of our body and what they've done. And so when Katina says she takes her clothes off, we're not talking like stripper days here. We're talking like she has a
wait, let them see it. Let them see it.
Can they see it?
You just never know what you're gonna get, so you might just have to watch it.
Where is there someplace they can see it?
Oh yeah, on YouTube you can look up Katina Hunter, The Gift,
okay.
or Hunter, Audience of One, and those are my two final speeches on my website as well.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage everyone to do that, especially The Gift. I love that one. The other one's good too. The other one's good too.
Well, I have to tell you that you were talking about embarrassing.
Yes.
Want to offend people. Okay, so I was giving a faith-based speech that was very popular for a while, and I was getting a whole bunch of different groups wanting me to talk about this near-death drowning experience that me and my family had, right? It was called The River. So I get a call from this lady. She said, can you please give this speech to this Jewish community? Now I'm Christian. And I said, no problem. Yeah, that'd be great. And I said, I need to comb through it to make sure I'm not going to offend them. I want it to be a universal message. That was my goal. So when I say, I combed through, it's a 30-minute speech, I combed through every word of that speech, and I plucked out anything that I thought might turn them off or might take away from the actual message and focus on God and not on Jesus and blah, 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 blah. And I tried really, really hard to do that. I mean, I was almost traumatized over this. And I went to my friend who is a Jewish man, and I said, please, can you let me know, watch this, let me know if anything. He's like, whoa, you are way overthinking things. It's fine. you mentioned Jesus, it's okay. So I'm like, okay. So I went, I gave this speech, and I get through the whole thing. I'm like, thank goodness I didn't offend anybody. It seemed like it was really well received. And as people are filing out of the room, they're like, oh, young lady, good job. Oh, that was wonderful. I really like this. I was like, oh, thank goodness I did all that hard work. I feel so good. And this old man shuffles up to me with this walker, and there's a man behind him kind of like holding him up. And he, young lady, that was wonderful. Thank you for coming. I said, oh my gosh, thank you for having me. And by the way, nice hat.
Nice hat.
So luckily he was a little hard of hearing, so I don't think he heard that part. But the guy behind him was like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, whatever. So the whole thing only to have like flubbed at the end.
Nice hat.
Nice hats.
I've learned, and you know, the webinar we did last week, which was called What's Going On, and we had some really great co-hosts, and we talked, it was heavy. We talked about racism and protesting and all this kind of stuff that's going on in the world. And someone had said to me beforehand, you know, I don't know how you're doing this. Was another white person said, you know, I can't believe you're doing this. Like, what if you say something? I'd be afraid I'd say something to offend someone, and I said, well, you know what? I did think about that. And then I kind of went into it saying, well, this is who I am. And if I say something offensive, trust me, they're going to tell me. And then that's how you learn, right? So now you understand the hat better, right?
Absolutely. And I think that seriously, solid people, level-headed people will understand the intentions behind what you say. So if you're intending it to be insulting, then yeah, I think that they have every right to be offended. But if you're sincerely intending it to be genuine, and if somebody is offended, I think that a private conversation would be like, hey, just so you know, when you said that one thing, it made me feel this way. And then you can,
right.
I think that intention goes a long way. And I think that people need to keep that, especially during these times.
So we're running up on time, and I did want to talk a little bit about virtual meetings, because that's what pretty much everyone is doing nowadays. And so I just wanted to run through a couple things to encourage people when you're going to some sort of virtual meeting, to first of all, dress appropriately. So we can, sometimes you may have been at meetings or I've seen some things on social media where the guy was naked and, you know, he didn't realize the camera was.
Woohoo! That's the best meeting ever. Exactly. That's much better than my office meetings, let me tell you.
Totally. Well, and the other thing I've learned about working from home is I can actually do therapy sessions in my nightgown, because it goes up so high, but I don't think I'm as professional and effective. So it's actually something I think getting dressed professionally like we do makes me feel like now I'm in Jill therapist mode, not Jill, I lounge in my bed and eat bonbons mode.
I like that mode.
I do too, but not what I'm doing. So get dressed. Be aware of your surroundings. So sometimes one of the things I've liked about doing telehealth, really get to see people's homes. You know, when patients come into the office, they're kind of on their best behavior, so to speak. But when they're home and then you see, you know, a mess behind them, or you see liquor bottles when they're clean for 3 months, you know, these kind of things I think can be helpful. But be aware of your surroundings, because people will learn things about you based on what they see around you during these conversations. And so here's the biggest one. You ready? Learn how to use your mute. How many people have been in a meeting and you have to be the one that says, you're muted, your microphone's off, unmute yourself. Do you hear me? So learn how to use mute and be attentive to it.
Did you see that commercial with Flo?
No, what does she do?
Oh my gosh, it's hilarious. So Flo and Jamie and all the progressive, right? Is it progressive?
Right.
Okay. So they're all on the Zoom meeting, and Jamie's like, hey, sorry, I look like crap. I'm growing this beard. And they're like, you have no beard. He's like, oh my gosh, it's so unruly. And they're like, you're on mute, stop it. And it's all the things you struggle with. It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Yeah, we've all been through it, right? We've all been through it. So one of the things I think is important now, I've been guilty of this sometimes, but try not to eat or drink when you're on a meeting. I always say this, if I wouldn't do it in a regular meeting in person, I try not to do it in a Zoom meeting, but sometimes I do. Stay seated and try to stay present. because that's easy in those meetings to be doing 500 different things. Some of you out there are listening to Katina and I right now doing 500 other things. We know it. It's okay. It's okay for this, but hopefully you're still getting to hear what you need. But think about your lighting, think about, and it's different if you're going to be in a meeting or if you're going to be presenting. But really think about, what's the lighting? Like even before this happened, Katina moved her chair to a different place and Jen was like, you looked better. The lighting was better in the other place. So she had to move her chair back. But test out those things. I think those things are helpful, because I don't think the virtual meetings, even after we go back to normal, I don't think the virtual meetings are going away. Now, Katina, you sell real estate. And how have you used the virtual world to kind of help you with your business, particularly during this time?
Right. I've actually been really surprised when all the news came down. Immediately, everybody thought, "Oh my gosh, what are you gonna like? We can't work. We can't work." But to be really honest, my business has thrived in this time because I feel that when you're faced with what seems like impossible circumstances, you either need to try or you're going to die. Try or die. So I thought, I can't show homes. I can't show my listings. My sellers can't show, nobody can go inside the house except for the sellers. So I immediately invested in virtual tour equipment, and I made that option to my sellers. I said, if you are willing to come to my house and I have a video that I did showing you exactly how to use it. You can sign this equipment out. It's yours to play with and use. Send me the link. And I was able to promote, even sell a lot of homes sight unseen.
Oh, so some of those, so many of those virtual tours, your clients themselves did?
Some, yeah.
Okay.
I redid them once we were allowed to, because, you want to make sure that it looks the best you can, have a little more practice with it. But absolutely, my clients took pictures. My clients took their own drone photography. The one guy had a drone. I was like, yeah, get some drone pictures. So a lot of that, you all have those things that at the end of the week, you shuffle to the next week that you never get to, like reword your website, work on your website, work on the little fluffy things that are good marketing, but you just need to really dedicate some time that you don't have time. While I'm sitting on conference calls, I said, all right, 1 page a day, I'm going to revamp my website. So all of these little things that I've been trying for years, literally years to do, kind of finally got done. And now I was able, when things open back up, when I say I hit the ground running, I never stopped. And I heard from a lender that I work with quite a bit. He said 90% of the realtors completely just stopped working and stopped, and you can't let that kind of thing be an excuse to stop your success. So
yeah, I think we saw that in my business as well, where we could have just shut down and said, sorry, we're closed. But I felt very strongly that we have clients that need us, and I have employees that need to make a living. And so we adapted. And I have to the virtual stuff. If you would have asked me, let's see, what is this, June? If you would have asked me 6 months ago, would I ever be a telehealth therapist? I would say absolutely not. That is not, it needs to be in person to be good, solid, genuine therapy. Come on. That's hokey stuff. And now I'm a changed woman. But I think part of that was being open to allowing that to happen and looking to trying to be creative and open-minded. And so I think when it comes to these virtual meetings and when it comes to public speaking in general, I think those would be some good advice is be creative and be open-minded. All of us have skills to be good communicators. We just do. It's innate to us as humans. Now there's all these other factors that sometimes get in the way. Stressors and the way my stomach feels when I have to give a speech, or this and that and the other thing. If we can work through those things, we all have the core to do it. So, and real quick, we're going to get ready to wrap up here. So if anyone has any questions or comments, throw them into the Q&A section for us. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. And am I going to share my screen? I am, just a second. Okay, I'm not going to share my screen.
DDAB would have been able to figure it out.
No, now I am going to share it because I just get confused sometimes. See, with the application, it's different, and so I get confused sometimes. Here we are. this is what I want to share. I asked Katina to send over some pictures so that we could just get a glimpse into her life. These were two of the pictures. Now, Katina, who is this young woman that's with you?
She is a former teen council member. She was one of my founding teen council members. I'm a volunteer with 4-H, and she has now grown up and is now the extension agent for the 4-H office in Lawrence County. She is an avid kayaker, and I only recently got a kayak, so we have been loving. I mean, whenever I get a chance, I'm like, hey, I need some girl time away from all this house full of boys. I was like, let's go get out on the water. So yeah,
I love it. Look how beautiful that is.
And I have a lot of fun.
That is a beautiful, beautiful picture. And then here's one of your boys, your oldest boy.
It is. That's Donovan. I have two sons. Donovan's 13 and Levi is 11, and they love kayaking as well.
Do they love it?
Oh, yeah. It's a real nice family activity.
Now, did you get kayaks for everyone?
We did. For Easter, all four of us got kayaks.
Okay.
And it was a big step for me because if you remember, I had that near drowning incident that I gave the book about. So being out on the water and having my kids on their own boats, it me, but it's something that I felt strongly that we needed to do so we could kind of move forward on this, because water is a fun thing. You just have to respect.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm so glad you did that. And everybody's enjoying it, right?
Oh, we love it.
Yeah.
We absolutely love it. Any excuse I can to go outside and get on the water now is my thing.
Last year, I think it was 2 years ago, my daughter and I went stand-up paddleboarding.
See, I'm too lazy for that. Gotta sit down and relax and do the whole thing. Like, who wants to stand?
That's funny. That's funny. We had such a great time though, and we said we were going to go back and do it again, and we haven't, but maybe this summer we will. But the funny part about that was my friend Lenny went, and he was an avid stand-up paddleboarder, and he was like, I've never fallen off. You can't fall off. Well, then he fell off. And when he did, he grabbed onto my daughter and pulled her off of her board. So I was like, not only did you fall, but you took my daughter with you. But I had to say later, at some point, I did just fall off my paddleboard. I have no idea what happened. Like, there wasn't a big wave or anything. I just fell off. And then we were in the middle of the river. It was deep, so I couldn't get a footing at all. And my arms were not long enough to grab the other side of the board. And frankly, I just didn't have the arm strength. I could not get back up. I had to hold on while Evie and my daughter drug me to the shore where I could get back on my board. It was
I would have paid good money to see that. Good money to see that. I think that would have been
right. I could make a speech out of that.
You got to get a kayak so you can just sit down and not worry about all that.
Yeah, maybe. You never know. We were looking at Sea-Doos the other day.
What's that?
Like water skis, like jet skis.
Oh.
Bill has a big history with those, and so I think he's having a little bit of a nostalgic moment, like, oh, what if we had those again? So they're a little more expensive than a kayak.
I can lasso your Ski-Doo in my kayak and just be.
Yeah. You could slide behind. You could kayak.
Yeah, I think we should try that.
Okay. Well, we'll let you know when we get them, if we get them.
Yeah, that sounds promising.
All right, everybody. I see we don't have any questions. I thank you guys all for coming today. It was such a great time to spend with you, and I always love spending time with Katina. I'm hoping to see most or all of you back next Friday at 11 for Lean On Me. And Katina, thanks so much. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks for having me. It was so much fun. Thanks, everybody.
All right, take care. See you, DDAP.
See you, bye, DDAP.